Good day, my friends, wherever you may be in the world. Alan Clements here. The fifth part of this series of 11 installments, God willing. Deadman walking, freedom never dies, 11 life lessons in facing death. All of us in the same planetary body, biologically awake and driven by the same conditions. Every one of us born into this world, as we breathe, in breath, out breath, mortality in every nanosecond of our heart, our bodies, our minds, our contexts. And these life lessons, I want to reiterate again, are not lessons that have been learned. They're very organic mosaics, if you will, organic rivers, streams, oceans, currents, atmospheres, spectrums of immersion into a meaning, a purpose that gives these lessons the strength to grow in intelligence and courage, to become more a part of us, a part of me. The first lesson, bringing God into the room, bringing our God into our lives. Non-postponed holiness, elevated, luminous Dharma. Grace under pressure, Aung San Suu Kyi's meaning for courage, courage renewed repeatedly under harsh, unremitting pressure. The quality of consciousness is everything. Engaging this continuum of perception made real on the interior of the mind, within the senses, at the confluence of what appears to be outside. Right there we feel the quality of consciousness is everything. Taking the destination out of existence, no longer going from here to there. Lesson 4, liberate your freedom, leave the fear behind. Touch and know, easy go, my love of freedom flows. Touch and know the presence of the phenomena as it appears within mind and body and form. Touch and know love, touch and know compassion, touch and know generosity from stinginess, touch and know these states of consciousness. Touch and know, feel, and easy go. Mindfulness, easy go. In the flow, my love of freedom flows, my love of freedom flows. The nibbanification of presence, a love of unconditional beingness that doesn't negate the experience, it touches it. It kisses it, it feels it, and it discerns it for what it is. Touch and know. Is it an appropriate state of mind to keep, to foster, to develop, or to release? The artistry of release, grasping, attachment. Lesson number 5, only you. Only you. Facing mortality. We've got our friends, we've got our families, we've got our fantasies, we've got our beliefs. But as you know as well as I do, you wake up in the morning, you walk, you move, you bathe, you anoint, you do what you do, and it is primarily O-N-L-Y, who has been diagnosed Maybe you're in a bed right now. Maybe you're on an IV. Maybe you are emaciated. Maybe you have hospice angels caring for you. It's very rare, isn't it? But is it really rare to have this diagnosis of a radical aneurysm that could burst at any moment like a radiator hose in an airplane? It's really crazy to deal with the anticipation of suffering, mortality, and death and anguish. But I'm walking. I'm healthy. I get to reflect on this process. I can't imagine what it would be like to do a Zoom group with fellow sisters and brothers in the hospice of our existence. Most, I'm told, are on high degrees of pharmaceuticals, fentanyl, morphine. They have their family around them. They're in the last 10 days, 2 weeks, month, 2 months, 3 months of their lives. They're not walking around doing yoga, walking on the beach and dancing, singing and creating. And yet, every one of us has an existential aorta, aneurysm, called inbuilt mortality. It's just wild to wake up and it's you again who faces you again in the context of this again. Only you, the subtitle today, reasoning power. I'll drop into this. Relativity. I was going to put the relativity of states of mind, but the relativity of something is another way of looking at the gradation, the valiance, the spectrum, the nuance, if you will, the authenticity of subtlety, of compassion. That we're in spectrum all the time, in the continuum of gradation, constantly feeling and looking at these different states of mind with ideals and beliefs, but there's the reality of who we are in the organic, breathing naturalness of our own flawed human desire system of being alive in our Dhamma. And right there, the relativity of everything that we think and feel and know and hope to dream, always graded by the instincts of sleep, of rest, of procreation, of bathing. Wow, wow. We are in this configuration of shared complexity. And primarily, no matter what one says, that there really isn't a centrality to the force of being. There is only emptiness of conditions. Okay, fine. But it seems like most of the time it is a you or a configuration of mind states making decisions to follow the breath mindfully and to release it into the unknown. To be willing to live and breathe in the ever-present reality of death at any second. That's what I'm hanging with right now, and it's so rad. It's, I dare say this with no satire intended, facing death is overrated. I would much prefer not to have a diagnosis. I'd much prefer to be dancing on the beach knowing that I'm going to fall in love with the goddess of my dreams and marry for eternity. But all of a sudden, everything is cut back to a cough, a sneeze, a further push, an avalanche of conditions that could interrupt the flow. This very second, Mr. Clements, you have been diagnosed officially as terminal. Soon you can have drugs to control your body and what they call your choice to take your life any second that you want. Because we respect the right to dignity and conscience and control of your own mind and body. Wow, wow, wow. Nibbana is one thing, but euthanasia? Is it that frightening to face tomorrow, tonight, right now, with the possibility of a catastrophic rupture? Just got off the phone with one of the doctors attending to me in this process, and he concluded as well, the radical nature of this surgery is really mind-boggling. Let me continue. Liberate your freedom, point 4. Leave the fear behind. You, the primacy of you, the empowerment of you, not overcoming anxiety or stress or fear or trauma, the empowerment of your greatness, the flower of your own mind. Invest in the beautification of consciousness, not overcoming the darkness between the petals. How many times I've had to say that to myself over the decades, and how many times do I say it to myself in a day right now? Do not buy the fear, Alan. Do not see the anxiety or the stress as somehow wrong. Do not think that you have to be in the ideal of what you think is true and right. The quivering factor, the vulnerability of presence, the relativity. Only you, reasoning power, relativity, and trust. Point 5, lesson 5. Only you, reasoning power, relativity, and trust. Let me go through them again very quickly and dive into point 5. Bringing God into the room. Grace under pressure. Quality of consciousness is everything. Liberate your freedom, leave the fear behind. I want to add a very important sentence that, I just cannot shake from my own soul. It's really, I would call it existential rock and roll. There is a freedom. There is a freedom that only you, today's lesson 5, only you can give yourself. Wow. I learned in meditation, I've learned by breathing, I've learned by loving, I've learned by being among savants, artists, yogis, meditators. This concept of immediacy, non-hesitancy, uncontrived as much as humanly possible, include in the uncontrived word, naturalness. Uncontrived naturalness, relativity. There is a freedom that only you can give yourself. Let's pause right there. What would it mean to give ourselves optimal freedom right now? Only you could give it. A political prisoner tells me that. Time and can we hear them in Burma? Can we hear them in Somalia? Can we hear them in Hong Kong? Can we hear them in Tibet? There is a freedom that only you can give yourself. And what does that freedom feel like? Touch and know. Touch and know. Freedom. Years ago, I remember a very dear friend of mine calling me and talking to me about her investigations into climate change. This must have been 10 years ago. And she and I went down a serendipity of research and discussions that led to radical climate collapse and eventually into the irreversibility of the extinction that we are in. And I'm not saying believe anything. I'm just sharing a personal journey here as it applies to my own diagnoses, illness, and my rebirthing process. And it was a very deep descent and ascent together into the word data today is sort of ubiquitous. Everywhere you look, data. And the science. And the truth of that data and the science, and connecting the dots of science and data among those minds, those environmentalists and scientists who have dedicated their lives to the study of the environment and the human's involvement, the anthropocentric element to the embeddedness of life within the context of the ecosystem. Nearly 8 billion of us here in this industrialized, uncivilized civilization, where it seems that our design on a DNA consciousness level is to self-destruct, self-annihilate, to soil the nest, to pollute the oceans, to denigrate the animals, the birds, the fish, and each other through endless wars and forever massacres and genocides, and the absolute violations of environmental and human rights. And many of us know today, 10 years hence in my own research, that we are deeply over the cliff in many ways. Such a triggering point. It's almost as triggering as vaccination or unvaccination or no vaccination versus who do you believe is telling the truth. It's such a triggering moment. But in reflecting upon this process of entering the sixth mass extinction without the possibility of reversing the death of most humans and nature and non-humans as well, beyond the fetish of factory farming that we're embedded in, that virtually is celebrated as a holocaust, a holocaustal behavior of the human. Not everyone, but the primary drive of the species. That many of you remember back in September 19th, nearly 2 years ago, when the young Swedish eco-activist Greta Thunberg addressed the United Nations and spoke to the representatives of the 193 civilized countries within the umbrella of the United Nations. And you might remember she gave that fiery, impassioned summoning to the people and to the world, which echoed my own research and my own studies that we are heading over the precipice. She was a bit more hopeful than I was. But I don't place my hope in longevity. That's another very important thing I've learned over the years, and especially now, is it's high quality over longevity. But she addressed the civilized world and told them, I do not want any more of your fairy tales of endless economic growth, of your primacy of profit and privilege and prestige, paraphrasing. All the ways in which the Buddha talked about in his famous simile of children in a house that was consumed by fire, and the children so enamored with the conditions of their joy, their rapture, their intimacy together, they were completely in denial of the context of their lives. And he spoke to, according to the Buddhist text, that these children were likened to humans within their own respective communities, nations, homes, cities, preoccupied with their toys and fears and doubts and predilections, and not aware of the anthropocentric nature of the climate collapse and the burning and the mass extinction of the planet itself. And in a way, as I reflect upon these things that happened way back, and I felt this remarkable sense, this deep, 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 and I know many of you have felt the same way, this deep existential grief And it's something I've struggled with since the diagnoses in April in Los Angeles with my heart and the valve and the vessels. There's a deep existential grief that comes when we come up closer to the interruption of continuity, the interruption of human relations, the interruption of our lives on this precious, incredible planet. But these higher perspectives, the meta-wisdom and the meta-ignorance that we get to touch when crises intervenes in the familiarity of our play within the house of the planet. And for a moment, many of us look out the window and go, oh my goodness, yes, there is smoke, there is fear, there is doubt, there is plastics, there is pollutions, there are these things called feedback loops. You throw something over a cliff and it gains momentum. The irreversibility of the environmental collapse that we as humans are principally the architects of through the denial of all of us having our hands and eyes and fingers and hopes and feet on the foot pedal of fossil fuels and consumption perpetuity, no matter what it is. How often I've said since I've been out here in Hawaii, just simply the drive from my abode here in upcountry to the food stores, hurtling at very high speed along highways, consuming the future of hope for the children and the future of children, to buy these items in a store that are shipped and flown. And it's so unthinkably unsustainable, to state the obvious, and to multiply that times 7.8 billion in all the megacities around the world, from Mexico City to Shanghai, to Ho Chi Minh City to New York. The lists and lists of mega consumption. And I'm talking about my own life lessons as I face death, and they are inseparable from the life lessons of all of us collectively looking at, I don't want to be a downer because I'm not into a downer state, but a realism state. The death of the planet, the death of future as we know it. Just like one person dying, an extinction is billions, along with multiple millions of non-humans and multiple billions of insects and birds and fish. It'll regenerate. We had 5 previous extinctions before this one. I don't have that kind of visionary power. I'm embodied like you, but reality is struck. There's a minute before midnight, perhaps a few seconds for all of us. And in that, only you, reasoning power, relativity, and trust. I've been reading a book for the last couple of years by Michio Kaku, the quantum physicist, the astrophysicist. And I think the subtitle of it is Interstellar Travel, Immortality, and Our Destiny Beyond Earth, the Future of Humanity. Interstellar Travel, Immortality, and Our Destiny Beyond Earth. And it's not something you can read, you enter it. You enter the gentleman's exploration of the survival of the genetic code of the human and of life. He is dramatically unhopeful of the future of the earth, which was surprising to me that although there may very well be life after the 6th mass extinction, And there may very well be 4, 5, 10, 50 other mass extinctions post the 6th. There's likely to be an asteroid that does dinosaur 2 or 3 or 4. But then he goes on to talk that hundreds of millions of years from now, really he points as an astrophysicist and a quantum physicist that the time when we talk about things in millions or even billions are just nanoseconds, fractions of time in the cosmological clock of infinity and eternity. And that our mother sun, the light that tans us, that grows our vegetation, that keeps this bandwidth of photonic resonance 7 miles high of light, where eyes and ears and bodies have evolved to co-create through the vision of perception based upon photonic refraction by a sunball 96 million miles from here that illuminates a little bit of luminosity around this little tiny blue-green sphere spinning around this sunball called a sun star. And it's so easy to just be those children in the house. It's burning, not just with California fires or British Columbia forest fires or the north coast of Australia forest fires or in Greece or in so many other places in the world, but the fire of human ignorance, the fire of human consumption, the fire of the end of life as we know it on planet Earth, and Michio Kaku talks about that our breathtaking sun that gives us life will soon, several 100 million years from now, engulf the very home that I sit today with you, sisters and brothers. Unimaginable that we're in the house that's burning, not just with mortality and old age and disease and death or climate change or irreversibility of mass extinctions and progressive extinctions and even the death of the planet, the sun engulfing the earth and incinerating everything that we've ever known, every legacy, every memory, an astrophysical silence that engulfs totality in earth is gone. And we see gentlemen like Jeff Bezos and so many other of the mega wealthy firing off their spaceships into the Michio Kakuian vision of interstellar travel, immortality. Can we plant existence elsewhere to survive? Not just me and my own mortality and my own fatal diagnoses, but to have a visionary embrace, a reasoning power like this, to consider things larger than my own welfare, the courage to care about things larger than my own interests. How visionary Mr. Kaku, in his book, The Future of Humanity, Interstellar Travel. How many of us have explored the psychic intuitive, the realm of the supernatural, the super knowledges, telepathy, clairvoyance, duplication of body, seeing through walls and minds and time and distances, and doing everything humanly possible to invoke radical imagination. Interstellar travel isn't just time travel for me. It's about the power of the imagination, the psychedelic infused with high degrees of refined mindfulness to break free of the centrifugal force of consciousness and fear and greed as we know it, and to illuminate skies beyond consciousness and forms and earths inside and outside. Right now, we're all cosmonauts, astronauts, radical savants, if you will, deeply empowering the rebirthing of life, not the death of life and the fear of death. Only you can give yourself the visionary power to see into a world beyond the destiny, beyond our own earth. Can we find planes of existence to seed existence? So much of this diagnosis has ignited in me a radicalization, a revolution of thought and wonderment and beauty and mystery and play. I'm held in something here through this "are you," that only you can give yourself the reasoning power to take yourself out of the confines of that house on fire and walk outside that house with your toys, with your friends, and look up at the sky and begin to imagine a world beyond the world that we're in as we know it. We're all the Magellans and Galileos and the greatest visionaries that have ever been born, that will ever be born. Trans-Buddha consciousness. It is in our heart. It is up to you to empower the reasoning power, to think beyond the pale, the box, the dogma, the paralysis of tradition, all of which has its value, but we're at the precipice. We're at the mountaintop, whatever you want to see. The future of humanity and Michio Kaku. Even your precious earth. Set aside your body, your visions, your dreams, our very home. Will be engulfed in flames, and all we'll have is a deep astrophysical existential silence. Right here, right now. And it brings up the last quality, this quality of trust. Where is there hope in this story? Where is there the true evidence of smelling and feeling the context of this claustrophobic dynamic? No blame, no shame. There's so much shaming and blaming that goes on. I can't even tell you, once you've been diagnosed with a fatal illness, you're often, you're unvaxxed, how often you're uninvited. Wait until you could drop dead at someone's party to be uninvited. I've had it happen 3-4 times now. Radically, we don't necessarily want you to die on our watch. It's not so overt, but that's the reason for the uninvitation. And there's also shaming that goes on. It's amazing to me how mortality and death and extinction ignite in people a type of unrecognized propaganda to vilify, to denigrate. I'm not saying it happens a lot, but it happens enough where I'm hearing it more and more about the people that I know who are choosing to examine the data, and they're not anti-vax. They certainly, the ones that I engage and talk to, speak about the necessity of a vaccination if you so choose, based upon your own research of facts and information, especially the older people or those with underlying ailments and challenges. I'm a real believer that, I love the radiance of natural light. I love the radiance of extracts and supplements. I love early intervention, getting it before it gets you. And yes, I am okay with the transition from life as I know it to death. It did bring up some years back after the climate issues and the losing of 3 of my best male friends, my mom and dad, my teacher, Saita Upandita, the travesty of my beloved homeland, Burma, the collapse of freedom and democracy there, the hunting of freedom fighters, the incarceration of friends, the vilification of my friend and mentor and sister Dharma ally, Daw Aung San Suu Kyi, by the international corporate media, the running dogs of idiocy, propaganda. I did contemplate mindful euthanasia. I'm contemplating it now. I think we all must contemplate it at some level because we're in this incredible shroud of what looks to be an irreversibility of what Michio Kaku and David Suzuki and lots of people have concurred. We're a human race, a civilization in a car, racing towards a brick wall of self-annihilation, and we're arguing, like the Buddha simile, of the toys, or what should be on the radio, or some are chanting Om, others are watching their breath, others are doing downward facing dog, but we're in the car hurtling towards the brick wall of annihilation. Tick, tock, tick, tock. The Doomsday Clock out of the Chicago group formed post-World War II in Hiroshima and Nagasaki to understand the triggers and the inevitabilities of the human-generated behaviors that we see and how that's going to lead towards the demise of life as we know it. The Doomsday Clock was moved up. Could it be a minute before midnight? This is pre-pandemic. The pandemic hit. I was in Los Angeles like you, all over. Look at Melbourne, Sydney, look at Byron Shire. Look at the world. Look at the violence and the protests. Look at the craziness in the world today. And lockdown, mandatory stay at home. It was very scary. I wrote a book called Extinction, X-Rated. I really recommend if you really want to fire up and see what imagination can bring. I can share my interior process. This was before diagnoses. But I contemplated mindful euthanasia. I want to be very frank in this series of talks. I'm not a polyamorous type. I'm a practical type. And I'm still contemplating, to be very, very transparent, I am contemplating every day. And I'm preparing for getting the various medications necessary to voluntarily, deliberately, and mindfully take life, my life, if I choose to do that. I want to have that choice without any question in my possession. It's not because of fear. That's very important. It's because of reasoning power. I was talking to my very dear friend, Janine Davies, in Vancouver yesterday. We were talking about our time in Burma. It must have been in 2016 when we were with the Venerable Sayadaw U Pandita a few months prior to his passing. And I had invited him into a conversation about everything. And based upon that conversation, he called us back. It must have been 8 nights in succession that led to a series of conversations that have been published a couple of times, but singularly in one book called Wisdom for the World, Mindful Advice for the People of My Country of Myanmar. I really recommend it, and it's also found in one of the volumes that my colleague and friend Fergus Harlow and I published last October in a 4-volume set called Burma's Voices of Freedom. It's also in there, along with other conversations I've had with the late Venerable Sayadaw U Pandita. The reason I bring this up is he's the one who introduced me to the concept of reasoning power. The mindfulness is valuable, but the reflective, inquiring, independent, analytical, reasoning power, the inherent quality of, call it Dhamma or Dharma or spiritual or mindful intelligence. Dhamma, spiritual, Dharma or mindful intelligence, reasoning power. It enters touch and know. Touch and know. Touch and know. Know. Reasoning power. He talked to us repeatedly throughout those nights of you must employ the power of your inquiry and your reasoning to determine why you are doing what you're doing, thinking and speaking, and to reflect upon what's really crucial. He was so radical with this quality that's come to me now post-diagnoses more than ever, which is what really matters. Within the sea of impermanence, prioritizing purpose. And I have never been more, quote, to mix my similes and metaphors, on fire, although I'm one of those children in the room, in the house on fire. But it's the radicalization of, I smell something here that's slightly off. And I'm going to put my head into the Michio Kaku interstellar travel immortality and our destiny beyond Earth dynamic. I do the Michio Kaku through the psychic dimensions. I don't know if you're with me on that realm at all, but I'm not really a space traveler. I've done my fair degree of psychedelics and still do. And yes, I do believe we live in a universe filled with other entities and devas and beings and deities. We coexist in multiple selves. How many times in the last month or two I've had these premonitions of feeling myself in slow motion forms, going from what I'm doing into a transcendent, semi-hallucinatory vision of myself moving from physical form into a more astral, trans-physical dimension, and all of a sudden I'm in a new environment. It's like an active slow motion hallucination premonition. And all of a sudden I'm interrelating with people who seem to know me, calling me by a name in which I'm responding instinctually. And all of a sudden I'm looking back to the life that I just kind of left, and I'm realizing, is this kind of a psychedelicized bardo? Am I getting a premonition of dying at any second? Do you ever have these kind of things where all of a sudden you look back and all of a sudden you can't remember where you were, what you thought, who you were with, what you said? Think about how short-term memory is, even 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, 50 years, way back, 60, 70 years, learning A, B, C, D, E, F, G. But sometimes I don't remember that. Well, lifetimes. You're looking back and all of a sudden I'm finding my memory fading. I can't remember my own name, but I remember the visual connection to my body and transition. And I'm feeling this sense, I don't know why I'm going off like this, I'm feeling this sense of my new identity with these new people. And I'm realizing, oh my God, I've written about this. My samsaric sangha, I'm with Maitreya, the Buddha to be. And I'm thinking of U Pandita with my friends, Janine and Derek in his room in 2016, reasoning power. And I will conclude here for these last few minutes of what Seda U Pandita introduced me to. And Janine and I were talking about it yesterday over FaceTime, reading the book together, Wisdom for the World. We were talking about a phrase that U Pandita introduced us to around the world of deities. I don't know if you're into deities. Entities have a little bit of a nefarious thing, but in the Buddhist terminology, deities are more embodied in the form, or understood, I should say, as the word D-E-V-A, deva, devas. Beings of refined cognitive frequency. We've all felt that meditatively. We've all felt that poetically. We've all felt that in lovemaking. We've all felt that to a large extent in various forms of psychedelic. The MEO, the DMT, the ayahuasca to a little bit of an extent, but more of the translucent luminosities of the LSD, the DMT, the MEO. Oh God, I am not the body that I am. Only you. Reasoning power, relativity, right? Rebirthing is relativity. Dying is relativity. Love is relativity. Compassion is relativity. The Earth's total lifespan, as Michio Kaku talked about, is relative. Therein lies where Seda U Pandita was bringing hope to us. The reasoning power to assess contexts that are often abstract, being in the house, that are narrow paradigms of identity. And it's not like you're walking outside the house that's burning, you're just dismantling the house. And therein lies the condition for the fire too. And so you're taking the death out of the paradigm, taking the death out of the simile. It's not about putting the fire out, it's not going outside, inside. It's basically dropping the propaganda. That's my point. Old age and disease and death. I'll venture to say here at the precipice of mortality and death, they're lies. Culturally sanctioned lies. Existential realities that don't really find any life. The Buddha talked about continuum. Seda U Pandita says, what evidence do you have, sir, of rebirth? I'm a son of the Buddha, Paticca Samuppada. The constituents of continuum, causality. From this arises that. Cease doing this, and that too ceases. Remove the fire only by taking the fuel and the air out. Oh my God. And he introduced a concept to us which he said was very refined to Buddhist cosmological esoteric teachings. Where the Bodhisattva, the Buddha to be, a being dedicated to the transformation of being through the 10 paramis, as you know, he made a vow to use reasoning power, mindful intelligence, spiritual intelligence, Dhamma intelligence, all of the intelligence, to reflect upon his circumstances. Where can I evolve the good, the true, and the beautiful in this circumstance? I want to be in a higher pressured environment. I want to test the stealth of my capacity to give. I don't want to just give conveniences and just give what I don't really need. I want to stretch my dana. I want to stretch my patience. I was just thinking about patience today. What a remarkable quality that I so overlook. The ability to stay in determined presence with complexity for the purpose of learning. Reasoning power to learn what you don't know, because if you want to give the gift of something, you must first acquire it. Reasoning power. And the Buddha was said to have been a bodhisattva prior to Buddhahood. U Pandita's commenting on the Tipitaka about the Buddha as a bodhisattva from his knowledge. He said the bodhisattva often as a deva, because there was so much pleasure and delight and he didn't really want to be there in that context, he committed a kind of deva-oriented mindful euthanasia through cognitive will, to be reborn in more favorable conditions, where the reasoning power could take him to a more heightened dimension of parami development. I'll conclude here, maybe continue tomorrow with a similar point. But point 5, only you, reasoning power, relativity, and trust. And right there, I'm a continuum, I'm a rebirthing phenomena. post-earth, post-death. Why? Because in my continuum, maybe you can relate, I define my identity, my you, Alan Clements, as an individual, as much as humanly possible, not developing mindfulness alone, but developing the attributes of consciousness known as the qualities and dimensions of excellence, the recipe for heightened liberation driven by the vocation of love and compassion. So that is the life of the Bodhisattva. Reasoning power to develop the paramis out of a love for giving to others the gift of the paramis and the gift of compassion. Conscious navigation that only you can give yourself, the reasoning power, and the relativity of these states. I conclude here. The 10 paramis, dana, generosity; sila, moral integrity; nekama, renunciation, simplicity; panya, wisdom, insight, a love of freedom; virya, energy, effort, vitality; khanti, patience, purposeful stamina; aditant, determination; metta, as we know, loving kindness, caring for another person because you seek their happiness; like generosity, but you deliver on the promise of elevating their happiness; and the 10th parami, upekkha, balanced engagement in the face of complexity. These 10 attributes of consciousness that define the identity of the Bodhisattva, and through reasoning power, we can evolve these qualities by acquiring them in our own mind stream, and we can take the fear, the individuality, the pleasure, the profit. This is the life of the yogi, right? You know this. These are very self-evident, I think, small case truths. But here in this process of Deadman walking, Freedom Never Dies, giving it my best here in this final series of talks, 11 life lessons in facing death and not really giving a fuck. It's really empowering this Dhamma stream. And trust. Trust. I don't know. I really don't know. I don't know. I mean, stating the obvious, I don't know. I'm saying things through the filter of my own brain and memory that inspire and touch me. But I feel that I'm in an event, an unoptional event called this life, this body, that is staggering, that's terrifying. I can hear the screams. Can you hear them? A little bit, tune it in. The screams of all those right now dying of COVID and Delta and war and rape and hiding in Burma, the massacres that have gone down in Rwanda, the genocides of Native Americans and indigenous peoples in Canada, in Europe, the onslaught of the white plague in Australia and the denigration of the indigenous people, the scream. What else is there about life? How many homes, how much money, how much crypto, how much sex, how much masturbation? Yes, it's all relative, but in the middle of it all, there is you and me. Only you can give your reasoning power, the relativity of your radical trust, what defines you. And that's what this diagnosis really has highlighted. Who are you really? And what are you on about? The radical trust in 50 conscious years, give or take a few seconds and minutes and decades, of a good attempt at giving Dharma, meditation, the Buddhist spiritual life and activism the best of my ability. So as I close today, I hope there's something valuable in this for you. And thank you for being a part of my life. Lesson 1. Bring God into your room. Lesson 2. Grace under pressure. Grace renewed repeatedly under harsh, unremitting pressure. The quality of consciousness is everything. Liberate your freedom. Leave fear behind. Only you, number 5. Reasoning power, relativity, and trust. And let us remember the voice of the voiceless right now, the political prisoners around the world who are fighting the good fight within dignity, within conscience, behind the iron bar, often raped and tortured at this very moment. They're screaming out to us, remember, there is a freedom that only you can give yourself. Think big, dream large. No matter how we perceive the house that's burning, whether it be the loss of freedoms and mobilities, vaccinations, unvaccinated people, whatever it may be, civilizations will come and go, extinctions will come and go, even our precious earth, according to the astrophysicists, will be engulfed by flames by our mother sun, a huge astrophysical existential silence. Let us dream and live in the wonderment of creating life, conceiving life, and keeping the most precious thing alive for me right now, in breath, out breath. Yeah, mindfulness is cool, but it's the Dhamma life, the life of the spiritual savant. I aspire to develop these 10 paramis: generosity, ethical intelligence, renunciation, insight, wisdom, a love of freedom, energy, effort, vitality, patience, purposeful stamina, truthfulness, principled existence, determination, loving kindness, balanced engagement, and a love of the dance of freedom. Unique, uncensored you on the terms of your integrity. Go for it. Leave nothing behind. Any second could be our last. Live it, dream it, breathe it. Dance on the transparent radiance of your own creation with the lovers in your life. Anoint the day and the night with the best of you. Make your life a masterpiece. There is no other time, obviously, than right now, today and tonight. God willing, see you tomorrow. From my heart to yours, thank you for tuning in.